distribution is slim. Yeah, Carly.
Is blue eye color a mutation from like an ancestry?
No, we'll talk about blue eye color. I promise I am getting there in just a minute. In fact, we're going to talk about it over the next couple of slides. So let's think back to Mendel's hypotheses, right? I want to actually write them, though I'm pressed for time. I want to write some of his assumptions up on the board, because there are violations to each one of these assumptions. Now, we have this tendency in all of our classes to focus on exceptions, right? We generate these laws, and then we spend as much time talking about the exceptions as we do about the phenomenon itself. Exceptions are exactly that. They are just exceptions. The vast majority of our genetic architecture works exactly the way that Mendel described. But there are exceptions. Few and far between though they may be, there are some that we need to talk a little bit about. But I want you to keep in mind that more often than not, Mendel was correct. So the first hypothesis, or the first assumption, is complete dominance, right? Something is either completely dominant or completely recessive. Second is that there are only 2 alleles for every gene. Now, accompanied with this assumption, 2 alleles for every gene, is that there are 2 character states for every character. Either you're purple or you're white, there is no in between, right? So, as a subhead, I'm just going to say 2 character states. Three, one gene affects one phenotype. And akin to that is one phenotype is controlled by one gene. Okay. So let's talk about some exceptions to these assumptions and hypotheses. The first one is continuous variation. We know that not all character states have only, or excuse me, not all characters have only 2 character states. There can be variation in between character states. And a really good example of that is human stature. We're not either 6 feet or 5 feet, right? There is continuous variation in how tall we are. That's because that phenotypic state, how tall we actually get, is affected by a multiplicity of genes. And by environment. There was this really interesting study done. It was a social study in which the stature of Japanese citizens in Japan was compared the stature, how tall they got, was compared before and after the introduction of Western cuisine in Japan, specifically McDonald's. So what they showed was, before the introduction of Western cuisine, on average, Japanese citizens were shorter than they were post-introduction of Westernized cuisine, specifically McDonald's. So that environmental characteristic increased how tall they were getting. Okay, so the important point here is there is continuous variation that can be controlled by multiple genes and environmental factors. There was this really interesting study done by this fellow to illustrate variation in stature. And what he did was he had an undergraduate class, and he had everybody go outside and line up according to height classes. So he had a range of like a few inches. And he had all the individuals that were really, really short, like 5 feet. Sorry if you're 5 feet, but Are you 5 feet?
I'm 4'11".
Okay, so you would line up right in here. And then he had these other age classes that went up to absurdly tall people over here. And what he showed was there was a bell-shaped curve in stature, right? There wasn't either tall or short. There was some continuous variation. Another really good example of this is human skin pigment. There isn't either light or dark skin pigment. There is variation, remarkable variation in skin pigment, right? The reason for that is skin pigment is controlled by 3 genes. Not a single gene, but 3. Each gene follows Mendelian genetics. So each has 2 alleles, and it's either dominant or recessive. The dominant state, or the dominant character, is dark skin pigment. And skin pigment, you guys, is a product of the expression of a gene, or excuse me, of a protein called melanin. It's just the amount of melanin that we have in our skins. That's all it is. Yeah, Sophia.
So people that are albino don't have that?
Correct. Yep. There was a mutation in which they can't produce melanin. Not just in the skin, but in the hair and in the eyes and places like that. Okay, so we have 3 genes. Each follows Mendelian genetics, right? So there is an A allele, which codes for melanin. A lowercase a allele, which codes for no melanin. Same gene, right? There's a second gene, capital B codes for melanin, lowercase b codes for no melanin. And then capital D, melanin, lowercase d, no melanin. So the question is, does this individual have dark or light skin? Very, very dark skin. In fact, you can't get darker skin than this individual has, because in every gene locus, we have an allele that codes for the production of melanin. Now, this individual will have darker skin than this individual, right? Because one of those genes isn't coding for melanin. So they'll have a little bit lighter skin. Question is, can 2 individuals with very dark skin have an offspring with very light skin? Yes. Right? If we cross two individuals that have that genotype, there is a possibility, slight though it may be, that they could have an offspring that inherited all recessive alleles from the parents. It happens. It's really infrequent, but it happens. Yeah.
Would that be albino?
No, they wouldn't be albino. They can still produce melanin. Their hair would be dark, for example, and they would have colored eyes, but their skin pigment would be as pale as mine.
That's for DNA testing.
So here's your extra credit. What is the probability of that genotype given this genetic cross? 10 points, extra credit. You can figure that out. Exception number 2. There's a phenomenon called pleiotropy, and that's where one gene can affect multiple phenotypes. Cystic fibrosis is a really good example of this. There is a single gene that determines whether or not an individual will have cystic fibrosis. Homozygous dominant and heterozygous individuals don't have it. Homozygous recessive individuals do have it. It's a recessive disorder. Fundamentally, what happens is there is a protein channel that allows chlorine ions to pass across lung membranes. The wrong kind of allele, that is the recessive allele, codes for a protein channel that doesn't allow the transmission of chlorine ions. And so what you get is the buildup of chlorine ions inside the lungs. And your body's response to that is to produce a really thick mucus. And it covers the lungs, which actually suffocates the individual. So a single gene affects protein shape mucus production, and respiration. That single gene controls 3 different phenotypes. Sickle cell anemia is the same thing, right? Ultimately, sickle cell anemia changes the shape of the beta hemoglobin protein, but it also has effects to change cell shape. It affects how much oxygen a cell can carry. It affects rates of respiration. It affects propensity towards organ failure and heart attack and stroke, things like that. So that's the second exception, pleiotropy. Third is incomplete dominance. Now this is different than eye color. Incomplete dominance says that a heterozygous individual will have an intermediate form that is continuously displayed. So, well, let me give you an example of incomplete dominance really quickly. Is it okay if I erase this? Okay. I'll just erase most of it. Let's say that there is a gene for flower color, and the alleles are either red or white. So capital R is red, lowercase r is white. If we cross individuals that are heterozygous, that cross will look something like this, right? Oops. Right? If there was complete dominance, how many of those individuals would be red? 3. How many would be white? 1, right? So that's a 3-to-1 phenotypic ratio. Incomplete dominance says that the heterozygous individuals will have an intermediate color between the 2 homozygous conditions. So this individual is red, this individual is white. If you cross red and white, you get pink. Heterozygous individuals would be pink. There wouldn't be red splotches and white splotches. It would be ubiquitously pink.
So that's what, like, when we were doing like the flowers, the purple and the white, I was like, I don't know why, but I was thinking like maybe there'll be like a lighter purple.
Like a lavenderish color,
Yeah.
maybe? Yeah. So in peas, there is complete dominance. In other types of flowers, like snapdragons, there is incomplete dominance. What is the phenotypic ratio with incomplete dominance? 1 to 2 to 1. Exactly right. 1 red, 2 pink, 1 white. Same as the genotypic ratio. Okay. We also know that the environment can significantly impact gene expression. There's this really cool phenomenon in Arctic forests that determines pelt color. During the winter months, their pelt is white, and during the summer months, their pelt is brownish, right? And it allows them to blend in to their environment a little bit better. Those genes that are expressed are determined by environmental conditions. Same thing with that Japanese experiment I was telling you about. And environmental conditions, diet, affected how bald individuals get. Epistasis is a 6th exception. Epistasis says that a single character is controlled by multiple genes, and this is eye color. So all of us, whether you have blue eyes or not, are inherently brown, green, or hazel-eyed. All of us have an allele that dictates those colors. Blue-eyed individuals, in fact, all of us have a second gene that tells us whether or not that first gene will be expressed. Blue-eyed individuals, you have you're homozygous recessive for an allele that says you're not going to express eye color. So you have blue eyes instead. Okay, so that was confusing. Eye color is controlled by 2 genes. One gene says you have either brown or green or both eyes. The other gene says you'll express this or you won't. Blue-eyed individuals, your gene says don't express that one. Most of us have colored eyes, the dominant condition, because this gene says express that gene. The same thing is true with pelt color in mice. Mice are either brown or black. But there's a second gene that says whether or not those pelt colors will be expressed. If it's not expressed, they end up being white. Yeah, Linda.
My sister has one blue eye and one green eye.
Interesting. So, can I tell you a story that's not very funny?
Sure.
Okay. So, that can be a product of environment. Did your sister receive any sort of trauma to her eye when she was young?
I don't know. I don't think
So when I
I
was
don't
young,
know.
when I was younger, a young lad, about the age of 16, 17-ish, as a part of this youth group, and my youth group leader and I were kind of buddies, and when guys are buddies, right, you punch each other in the shoulder. That's just what you do. I remember after church one day, I saw him down at the end of the hall, and so I was coming up behind him and I was going to punch him. And he heard me coming, and he turned around and was holding a baby. Yeah, this happened. So he turns around, and I just lay into the baby, punch it like square in the eye. And yeah, it was crazy. Like it's a total baby. Like its eyes hadn't changed colors yet. Baby, and I punched it in the face. That little sucker had it coming. Anyways, as it turns out, the eye that I punched remained blue, and the eye that I didn't punch turned green. So, it was
I'll
crazy.
have to ask her.
So, like last year, this guy reached out to me on Facebook and was like, "Hey, are you the guy that punched me when I was a baby?" And I responded, "Yes, I am." Environmental effects, right? Okay, so codominance is very much like incomplete dominance. And codominance is where both alleles are expressed equally. That's hazel eyes. You see both the expression of the brown color and the green color. I know I'm running over a little bit, but I want to get to this last example, this last exception, and that is multiple alleles. There can be more than 2 alleles for every genetic character. And the example for this is blood type. I'm going to actually point this out. And I'll use this side over here.